Elina, Montel Intergalactic.
Boss, SOK.
Jussi and Lauri at Montel Intergalactic.
Miss Fab at Montel Intergalactic.
Because of the new corona restrictions, it's better that we don't all gather in the same place. We are now in 3 different locations, so 3 different screens. We'll start going through the questions that you guys have sent to us beforehand. The question was, what are your favorite libraries for Flutter to speed up the development or make apps more solid?
I would say it's a pedantic package where you use it to enable static code analysis. And pedantic consists of lint rules internally used by Google Teams, and you can add it into your dev dependencies, and that would.
The next one, I think that's a package fairly known to a lot of people. One of the things I love about Flutter is that you don't have to have a million dependencies. So this is kind of a controversial question for me. I just want to throw a package that we've used in several projects, and that would be Redux. I'm not saying that I'm a big Redux fan, but you have to have your state somewhere. So Redux is one of the less painful ways to manage state.
The charts Flutter, well, I think it's a Google project, but not part of not a first-party library. It's very, very polished, very production-ready. We used it. We've used it in a production project for iPad and iPhone and Android, and very handy for creating charts, interactive charts. And also, there's another package called FL Chart that's a bit more cartoony, a bit more like flashy and round and pretty, but I haven't looked into the functionality yet with that. And I'd like to see if any of the audience has any favorite packages they might share on the chat, because like Lauri said, Flutter doesn't really have a huge ecosystem of libraries yet, because a lot of the stuff is built in. So interesting to hear.
And I added the shared preferences library. I think it's a very essential library for any Flutter application. It helps to store information on the device itself. So whether if you're doing like auth stuff for the application or anything related to that, I think it's very essential for an app, and you can use it in various applications.
Okay. Well, now we received a comment from Topi. I've used block/Qubit for state management. What are your thoughts about those?
I think one thing that I've noticed is that since like it just touches other questions as well, but like since the Flutter community, the support is not like very extensive. So when I was like trying to experiment with block, it became like a little complicated. So I just instead used like Redux. That is like one of my experiences.
So Kevin is saying that block is really good for decoupling business logic from UI. I recommend it.
Good to hear that you have positive experiences.
On to the next question, which is how to bridge native code with Flutter, or how to integrate Flutter into existing native apps.
That was, I think, mine. So I'll answer in the 2-part question in 2 sections of an answer. So there's basically 2 ways in Flutter that you can integrate with native code. The first one is through plugins. So you can build background services that connect to either iOS or Android native code. And then you can also build modules. And modules are now an interesting way to kind of piecemeal replace your existing Android or iOS app. So basically, if you have a large code base in Java, Kotlin, Swift, or Objective-C, and you don't want to replace everything at once, you can use Flutter modules and replace or bring in a Flutter views into certain spaces. Now, there's a bunch of restrictions about this. I'll go through those quickly. As a word of warning, I know quite a bit about the plugins. I know absolutely pretty much nothing about the modules except what the internet tells me. So bear with me, and if there's a module expert here, then I'd really like to hear some real life experience as well, if it really works that way. But let's move on to the next slide, the gesture interface. Yes. This is an actual example from what a plugin looks like. A plugin is a super simple way to integrate your native code with the Flutter Dart world. Basically, it goes around a method channel, which is a way to pass messages back and forth between the native Dark side and the Flutter world. This is an actual pieces of code from an actual application we're building. So in the Flutter Dart side, you have you define a plugin class, you define a method channel for it, you attach it so that there's actually something listening. You have a function listening for messages coming in from the native side to the Flutter side, and then you can invoke methods or kind of send messages into the native side. Then on the Kotlin side, this is from the same project, a very quick, simple overview. So you have your Kotlin implementation, which then attaches as well to the Flutter side, defining what function will be called when new methods are coming in or new messages. And then in that function, you just do whatever you want to do with your native code. And then there's a way, again, a similar API to invoking methods that go back to the Flutter side. This is very simple to reason about, very simple to build your native code around, and very easy to keep it separated. And we've used this in 2 projects at least, and usually the use case has been kind of separating very specific Bluetooth handling logic with very specific protocols away from the Flutter world. Now about the modules, this is interesting. This is a way to embed your Flutter views into iOS and Android. There are very good documentation available on the official docs with actual GIF animations showing you where to click on Xcode and where to click on Android Studio. So it's super easy to get started with those. There are some limitations, and that's an official quote from the Flutter docs. So it's 1 full screen Flutter instance at a time per application. So it's not going to be a magical thing that you can mix your Flutter code or Dart code wherever, but it's going to give you a way to start thinking about writing a certain piece of your monolithic, huge native application at a time. I recommend reading the docs, and I recommend looking at a video, which pretty much just reads through the docs, but it's still a video format. So it might be a good way to start looking into modules.
Okay, so the next question was, what does Flutter need to become more mainstream?
Yeah, these are my personal opinions on what Flutter needs to become more mainstream. So I think one of the key main features that's lacking in Flutter is the over-the-air update, like there is in React Native and Cordova. What is over-the-air updates? It allows update application without having to roll updated version to Play Store and App Store. And currently, Flutter had this in their roadmap in 2019, but later postponed it because they felt like over-the-air update requires implementing of just-in-time compilation, and that would hinder iOS performance. They think that that's not worth taking the risk. Maybe they have to think ways of re-implementing that in the future, but for now, they postponed the plan for OTA. And the second reason is that if you allow over-the-air update, that means you allow like arbitrary execution of code when you update the applications. That in turn will open up for the people to use this loophole to install malicious script to run. And Flutter team did not want to take that risks. And the third reason why Flutter postponed is because there's no out-of-box hosting solution for patching application yet at the moment. I think Code Push, they're trying to do it, but they have postponed as well. Yeah, you can read more about this, like why Flutter teams postponed this over-the-air update feature implementation, more on the link.
Or boss, is it a good time for you to answer this extra question we got from the chat?
Sure.
John asked, how does OTA align with Apple App Approval guidelines?
Well, actually, it's not aligned, but they're sort of flexible about it. Like React Native that does it. I was patching the JavaScript, but so far Apple has been quite lenient on it. There's a workaround on it, so they're quite lenient. If Flutter were to implement, then there would be like a lot of compromise, and they have to make sure that they comply with the iOS App Store policies as well.
There's the next slide for you, boss.
Yeah. Also, there's not many features and tool sets around GraphQL, like at SOK. We had this project where we use GraphQL and we require client-side management, and we were considering like two options for cross-platform, which is Flutter and React Native. But we found that Flutter doesn't, like Flutter GraphQL, which is like a community package, they don't support client-side state management or catch invalidation. And we have to sort of, instead of using Flutter as a solution, we have to use React Native instead. But if Flutter GraphQL could catch up the features and toolsets of upload client, like in React, I think that would also help people or companies to adopt Flutter more. Yeah, and one of the things I think that would make people start using Flutter is by making Flutter Web more stable. Because if you look at the chart, you see that most of the software developers are JavaScript engineer, and they work on the web front end. And if the Flutter team can make this to happen, I think we can encourage web developers to try out Flutter more, and therefore they learn about Dart and pick up the framework.
I'll cover Flutter for web a bit more later, and also the desktop. So I think the whole focus thing is one of the problems, that it's gotten so wide, and they're introducing new stuff without really kind of finishing everything that they already have, and also playing a bit of catch up with regards to performance, especially.
Yeah. I think from my point of view, I think one of the organic growth blockers or kind of slowers is now Dart in a way. People are maybe a bit skeptical in learning a new language, even though Dart is probably one of the fastest languages to pick up. And it's then once you get used to it, it's really convenient and nice to write. But I think because there's really not much. I mean, if you look at, like, for instance, I've shown like Stack Overflow, questions from Dart relating, and then questions from Flutter on the same graph, and those graphs follow each other exactly. So it's like Dart is basically the same thing as Flutter. So people are not picking up the language. So the only reason to pick it up is Flutter. So then that might be a bit of an issue for some people, even though I would argue that it's really not an issue. It's just a fun thing to learn.
And also maybe the fact that they are so heavily invested in material UI widgets, that takes a lot of development time, and basically then if you're really creating a complex app, you're not gonna use it anyways. You're gonna do your custom widgets anyway. So maybe some people would think they're doing it in vain, and they need to rewrite them or redo them once in a while when the guidelines change and stuff like that. So
yeah, it could be.
Or there's a comment in the chat actually. Someone says, I disagree on how fun Dart is. Maybe after Java, but otherwise quickly it looks like quite verbose.
I think it's quite nice compared to writing, for instance, with TypeScript and React Native. I find it okay. It's not my favorite language, mind you, but it's less painful than most.
Yeah, it's an IDE language in a way, so it's meant to be used with an IDE.
Something that does your writing for you.
Yeah.
Okay, we will move on to the next question then. What is the status of Flutter web support at the moment? And also let's take a look at Flutter desktop at the same time.
So just a quick introduction, like what's Flutter Web? It's basically an engine written in Dart that takes the whole Flutter framework and runs it on top of a browser. And a year ago in a meetup, I said that it's almost there. It's in beta. It's still in beta. if you go to the next slide. It's surprisingly stable now, but they are all the time playing catch up, and people, like I said, people are complaining about performance problems in rendering and uploading times, stuff like that. So it turned out to be more complex than they probably estimated. And I know that there are some apps that are in production using it, but usually there are apps that have kind of, they go, if you go like mobile first and then you embed that to your website or something like that, then it's usable. But it's I wouldn't like start writing web first things with it. So for limited scope, it's fine already, but a lot of stuff still missing from being stable. And then on the next slide, Flutter for desktop was just introduced, and it's in alpha now for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS shells. And in many ways, it's in better shape already than web, because like you can run everything like quite smoothly. So it's like the core shell stuff works better than in web, but then they're still missing some libraries, they're not working, etc. And like there's a couple of production apps out, like Autopass. They just kind of compiled their release their app from mobile straight to desktop. So like I said, it's taking a lot of time to like smooth out all the small issues that are. And I don't think I could recommend like Flutter for web right now for anything that you want to look like pixel perfect or want to be performant. So maybe more like if you have a certain component that you want to embed into your website or release in addition to your mobile app, then it's fine.
I think I can add more stuff about this. Like I tried Flutter Web, I think 3 weeks ago, and then there's a way to tell like if the website is developed using Flutter or other framework by if you cannot drag over the text on the website, then that's pretty much Flutter, and it's still like 2 years.
Yeah, the whole approach is quite different because it's because it generates all of your CSS and HTML and JS for you, and there's no way you can like it's not like a traditional web app that you it's just if you go and inspect it, it's insane. So
forget about any accessibility or any of those guidelines.
Yeah. But the desktop stuff has much more promise, I think.
Estimate of work amount per view when rewriting an existing web app or PWA in Flutter.
I think that's mine, or at least I can tell a short story. So those of you who were in our first meetup heard about me talking about Kick AI, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But it's a wearable smart sensor for martial arts that we've now written in Flutter, and there are several different applications written in Flutter within the Kick AI project. And originally, back in 2018, we were in a position where we had a prototype working, kind of the science was sound, and we knew that this might actually work. And we then noticed that we have to build a consumer app out of it, so that's something that people can actually use. And we hired an external consultant for it because we were currently very pressed with time. And the external consultant was a very capable mobile developer, and he wrote a complete application, an Android application with Kotlin in about 20 days. So he had really good specifications. He had working proof of concept prototype. So he basically had all the hard problems solved for him. So it took him 20 days to write it. Then we came to the realization that, oh shit, we have to write the same thing for iOS, because there are iOS users in the world as well. And for the CTO at the time, which was me, it was a completely painful realization that then I would have to juggle between two development teams on a small budget, tiny firm like this, and decide on when to do releases for both and integrate changes into both. And to write the iOS side, we didn't want to do Objective-C. I think Swift was around the corner back then, but we didn't have much knowledge on it. So we were trying to look for alternatives, and we found Flutter. And we decided, okay, we're going to give Flutter 5 days and see how it goes. And if it looks like it's a good way to write an iOS app, then let's go with it. And it turned out that in 5 days we were very happy, and 5 more days we had the whole Kotlin feature set implemented in Flutter. Now at that point we also noticed that why do we actually do this Kotlin thing at all, because we could just roll out just one Flutter app for both platforms, and we did that with a few more days of coding, and we came up with multi-platform solution in less than 15 days. So that's the comparison. You write an app with Kotlin that took the consultant 20 days. It took us 15 days to write a Flutter app, basically mimicking just what the Kotlin thing or what the Android app did. Of course, unfortunately, this very well-built, polished Android app went straight to the trash, but that's just the kind of things you have to deal with in these kind of development circles. So to answer the question, how long does it take to write a view? I usually estimate for Flutter that it takes me a day per view, and that usually works because some of the views take way less. You can write 5 views in a day easily, but then there are those that take you a lot longer. And then, of course, you're going to want to put in the extra stuff you put in for models, for business logic, for connections to your backend, whatever that is, and then CI/CD and so forth. But I'd say I roughly usually estimate 1 day per view.
How about you others? What kind of estimations would you give?
I think it's more or less the same. Of course, it depends on like how complex the view is, but I think I would also go with the same kind of estimate. Like the layouting in Flutter is like really fast, so you can really build like faster views. And I think the most time that you might need is also in like writing the models and getting the data flowing to the widgets and everything.
Then we can move on again to the next question.
There's a question.
Oh, okay. Lauri asked from the audience, how is the responsive UI dev in Flutter? So landscape, portrait, phone, tablet, etc.
There is a set of different tools for doing responsive UIs, and those are very well supported on the platform side. I have to say that I haven't used any apps, or I haven't developed any apps that do very different portrait and landscape, so I can't say that I have any practical experience, but reading through the docs, they seem very solid. I don't know, Boss, if you've done any.
No, I haven't. Only on the portrait and usually mobile. I never done on the tablet.
But it's on the platform, very core.
Yeah, I think there should be like plugins where you can just call the API detecting if the application is running on which platform, and then based on the platform you can write the corresponding UI.
Next question, which is, all the example videos, even Google's own, seem to easily lead in more complex code to Pyramid of Doom. How best to combat this? And also, are there any de facto standards around this in Flutter?
I think in general, to combat complexity of any code, I think you should have architecture in your code and follow software principles like solid, single responsibly, and those stuff. Keep it simple, stupid, don't repeat yourself, and you're not going to need it again. So by following those principles, you basically write a clean code, well structured, and more maintainable. And on the right, I have this example of Flutter app architecture using like MobX or in general. So basically you have UI layer, then you have your business logic layer, and then you have your service layer, and then you have your external service layer. So by separating your code into different architecture layer, you sort of see your data flow and see how code flows. So it's more predictable. Also, apart from having architecture, also I think you must also have that code quality. And I think best is to like follow Flutter and Dart best practices, and also enabling static analysis using, or you can use like Pedantic, which is like Google lint rules, or you can use effective Dart or lint, which is like commonly packaged rules. And also remember to write tests to make sure that your application works as expected. So by doing all this stuff, you basically make sure that your code is predictable and also easy to read. And that way you can reduce complexity. So I had added an example how you can add a lint package into your application or your project. So by adding, so you basically add the package to your dev dependencies, and then you create analysis options YAML file, and then you add the package. You include the lint package to your application, and that would basically enable the static analysis, code static analysis rules, and it just works. So any comments from other people?
No silver bullets from here.
No silver bullets. Yeah, it's all about architecture. We've used to hide some complexity or introduce more, depending on our viewpoint. We've used also kind of reactive libraries. So we've had RxDart, which if you read reactive code easily, makes it easy to see stuff, and if you don't, makes it very hard to see stuff. So again, question of architecture.
John is commenting in the chat that I would suggest as well to split UI in different widgets instead of adding many widgets into the same tree.
Yeah. If you wanna avoid the, like you said,
the pyramid of
doom.
Yeah.
Nested.
Yeah, that's how you would do it on the UI side, exactly.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Okay. Thanks for the comments. And let's see the next one. It is input data save to MongoDB ?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. I'll show you why it proved out to be interesting for me in a while, but first I'll jump into a demo. So kindly, will you, Elina, stop sharing so I can start sharing? Good. So I'm hoping you see this. And now you see this. Yes, good. I built a very simple application that is a proof of concept that yes, you can access MongoDB data with Flutter. This is, let's increase the text size so you'll see something. I'll show you two files. I don't know if you ever read Dart or ever read Flutter. That doesn't really matter. It's so simple. I'll just show you first what it does. So let's see if it will actually start up. It's loading. The development experience is a lot faster with hot reloading, but the first initial load will always take a bit of time. Okay. This is basically the hello world, but with Mongo, more or less, and with stupid functionality. So it's reading a Mongo database, and when I click on plus, it'll pick a random name, and it'll throw it to the Mongo database, which will then display that. And we can also break this application very easily to see the classical thing that Flutter gives you a warning that if something is overflowing, oh, there we have it. Yes. But yes, you can insert data. So what does it actually do on the code side? Let's take a look. I'll increase the font size once again, so we'll have more. First off, let's look at what our dependencies are, because this is always the most beautiful thing I want to show compared to, let's say, React Native or JavaScript or whatever Cordova project. The only dependencies we have added here is to access Mongo. So Mongo Dart seems to be a fairly official and pretty much the only package. Then there's provider, which I've just thrown in as a simple way to keep my state out of my widgets. Have a short look at that. So quick read through to the code. We're importing the relevant packages. This is our main application, which is basically bundling our model, which is the name list model, where the random names come from, with my app. And the name list model is the one connecting to the database. This is a change notifier, which is provided by the provider package. Now, again, Flutter won't force you to any particular state management. It'll give you a myriad of options, including Redux or whatever. And this provider is just kind of one way. It's basically the observer pattern, a very simple observer pattern, from, general computer science. Mongo code is as on any platform. You connect to a mysterious IP address to a certain database. Then here we have connecting to collection. So we open the database connection. We select the collection we want to play with. So Mongo collections are kind of like document spaces in a way. And once we're connected, we update our state. So we know that we don't have -1 documents. We have 0 documents in the database. And notify listeners is something that will then say that, okay, this state has changed. Now everything that's interested in this state will re-render and update. And then we have one callback here, which is add name. So you give it a name and it'll just throw that name into a silly, simple Mongo document. And then the actual app. This is the standard way you do widgets in Flutter. So you have first a stateless widget, which has we're first in the app. So we have a stateless widget, which is building a material app. So you'll have the fancy green here. You can change that to maybe red, just for fun. And then it'll turn to my homepage. Let's actually see how quick the hot reload is. And then we're building the my homepage widget, which contains all the silly stuff we're doing. And this is a stateful widget. And actually the whole beef is here. We have a callback for a button, which picks a random name and calls the model to add it. And then we have our basic scaffolding building of a basic view, which just has a text at the top and then a list. If we have any names, it has a list view like right now, and then it has no names available if there's no names available. That's all. If you have any questions, please ask. I'll move on to the point of why this question or why my solution maybe is a bit silly. If not, then Elina, can you please share the...
Sure. So yeah, Kevin is asking MongoDB versus Firestore, which one you prefer and why?
Good question, Kevin. Let's go to that through the next slide. So at first, I actually thought that this is a bit of a silly question. Who would like to save Mongo data in directly from a Flutter app? Because normally what you end up with is scenario number 3. You have your mobile app, you have some backend, and then you maybe use Mongo underneath as a database layer, and things go through GraphQL gRPC.
Or more probably use
REST.
several databases. So.
Yeah, Mongo probably being the one, or maybe the one you're trying to run away from to migrate to a faster database. Then there's the option that we just used in number 2. I had a Mongo running on my host computer, so it would have been the same thing to run it over the internet, let's say on Atlas or somewhere in a central service. So you connect to an IP address, and basically it's functional. There is authentication, there's encryption. So if you don't need any business logic, you could basically do that. Then there's actually a third option I just learned about, which is now option 1 here. I'm going in reverse order. Option 1 is actually that Mongo provides Mongo Mobile, which is a tiny embeddable Mongo that you can put on your mobile device, and you can actually make it sync with whatever huge replica set online. So you can have shared state kind of transparently without writing code.
Be a lot cluster of.
Yes, you can have a huge cluster of tiny Mongos integrated to a bigger cluster of. Not saying any of these, which one of these actually makes most sense, but I would say that I've actually built production apps with like approach number 3. So I think that's the most common one.
And the store, like, well, about Firebase, Firestore.
I would probably, regarding Flutter, I would maybe go with Firestore. The use cases are, I would say, maybe a bit different. Mongo being, documents mostly, but then again, you can use Firestore with that as well. Firestore is probably better supported with Flutter, and that's a Google product, and they're kind of, there's even a site.
Yeah,
there's even a separate site for Firebase, Firestore stuff.
And when you're using like Firestore or Firebase, you can leverage all the other services that they give you, so your development is even more faster. Like for example, like the auth, you can, if you're already using like Firestore, you can just use the Firebase authentication as well. So that saves you a lot of time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So maybe Firestore in this context. And the answer is data available? Is it possible to put in Mongo? Yes, it is.
Okay, Kevin is saying thank you at the chat. Any more questions? And thank you, Lauri, for the great demo and a profound answer. Okay, then the next question would be, is it possible to manage map layers in Flutter? I think, Boss, you had something about this.
Yeah, I have never worked with maps in Flutter, so I think I did the quick Googling. Seems like there are 2 solutions using Mapbox.gl and Flutter maps. But anybody in the audience, if you have tried out, let me know. But with Mapbox.gl, I think you embed the native view, and then you can just layer like widgets on top of the map.
And we can continue. While we were on the break, John left us a question. Which crash reporting library or service do you recommend to use within Flutter? Crashlytics missed some ways to define Flutter crashes as fatal, at least some time back, which is not ideal.
I'm researching now which one we actually used back in the day in Kick AI. I can't remember which one it was. That was quite okay, but I don't have any recommendations really. Do you, Boss, have any?
Me neither. I have usually Crashlytics for Flutter.
Oh, damn! So did we. Yeah. So
yeah, that's kind of what comes out of the box. So
yeah, kind of default. I don't know if something like Sentry would.
Yeah, I wonder the same, like, because Sentry is most React Native use Sentry, but I'm not sure about how does it support in Flutter as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the extra question, John. Next, we have a bit of a battle coming up. We have quite a few questions that were about Flutter versus React Native. So we're gonna tackle those questions next.
So I was basically, to answer this question, I thought that building the same kind of application in both React Native and Flutter would be a good way to sort of compare the two technologies that we have. And this is completely my point of view, but I found Flutter, like I have already said, that it's comparatively faster to write and develop views compared to React Native. But of course, like React Native offers like more like extensive and detailed, like you can do like more creative stuff with React Native. There's something that I also noticed was that for example, like the floating action button, that's like a very key widget in Flutter and in like a lot of mobile applications. React Native doesn't have it, so you have to like either you download like an external library that provides you the action button, or you create your own button. Of course, it gives you slightly more advantage in building like customized buttons, but I think you can also do that easily in Flutter. So it's just that there's a lot of things that come already bundled with Flutter, and there are a lot of things that you have to get from the outside or depend on in React Native. So I don't know, I have like a slightly biased opinion when it comes to like choosing either of them. So, but yeah, but my experience was that I enjoyed doing the same thing in Flutter more than in React Native. And if we move to the next slide, there's like some more comparison between the two, and of course, like every technology has like a pro and a con. So, like for example, React Native uses like JavaScript, and there's a gradual learning curve. And if you already know React, which is in itself quite a technology, I mean, like React Native becomes like much easier. While Dart is like, it's a different. Some people say that it gets like some stuff from like JavaScript as well, but I feel like if you're doing JavaScript for like 2 or 3 years and you've already been doing like JavaScript, I think Dart offers like a good sweet escape from the whole JavaScript ecosystem, and then you can do slightly something different, and just to develop your skills in a different technology as well. Of course, React Native has like a bigger community of developers, and there's like extensive support available online, which really helps. But Dart, I mean, if you're not doing like something really complex, and if even if you just rely on the official documentation, you can like get through a lot of stuff. It's really readable, and like you understand it pretty easily. Well, one benefit with React is that it's the same JavaScript ecosystem. So of course, like it's easier for people who are already web developers to get into mobile development and start developing apps. Like Laurie already also covered, one thing about Flutter is that you can also like integrate it to native applications, and it's not that complicated. So I think that's like kind of a good point for Flutter as well. There's one thing that was in comparison on multiple places, that React Native is something that you would use mostly if there's a very highly complex application that you're building, while Dart was put out there as a more suitable fix for developing like MVPs and like proof of concept applications.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, of course, like it's not that mature if you compare it to React Native, but I think like there's still a lot of things that you can do with Flutter. So, yeah. And then some of the cons for React Native that I found was that, of course, like I already mentioned about the floating action button and some other things that you have to like rely on external libraries unless you want to do it yourself, which of course adds to the development time as well. So a normal mobile application project in React Native would be, I believe, a bit longer than in Flutter. So that's one thing. Then there is, of course, like I think Boss mentioned this point of steep learning curve for animations in React Native. Do you want to share something on this?
Yeah. So in Flutter, it's the APIs are very intuitive compared to React Native, and React Native usually use native. You can use a native API, but there's a sort of like problem with the animated API because it can suffer from a performance issue if you overuse it extensively. And so there's a workaround that by using React Native reanimated package where it uploads all the animations to the native side. But the API is really hard to master, and you need to learn a lot of stuff to understand that. You have to understand the bridge, how the bridge works, how the React Native communicate to the native side. So there's a lot of things you need to learn before you can master this animation. Whereas Flutter, the API are very intuitive.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Like you can get really smooth animated experience like from the get-go. So with even the basic setup and the built-in widgets. So I agree that in Flutter that's much more.
There's a lot of things that already comes like kind of like installed and ready to use with Flutter, and then I think that really adds to the experience.
Yeah. Like in all, I think in Flutter, like getting a finished, like polished looking UI is faster and easier using the widgets. Better for building MVPs, it says right there. Yeah.
Yeah, also I want to add that there are more toolings in Flutter than in React Native. Like the dev tools in Flutter, it's better than in React Native in general.
Yeah, that's mentioned in a question on the chat, like what kind of testing tools, and I like to say that a lot of the stuff that's built in, there's the test package for unit test and the Flutter test for widget tests, and then the Flutter driver for basically doing what like WebDriver does. So all of that works pretty nicely out of the box. So
yeah,
I haven't had any need for finding any external packages for that.
Yeah, when you create the example application, it will come with a set of example tests that are on also on the widget level. So it's really handy, really quick way to get up.
Yeah.
So do we agree that Flutter is better than React Native?
It's controversial.
Yeah, you can't say that.
Yeah, if your boss buys it, then yeah.
Okay, both have their pros and cons.
Exactly.
There's a new question also in the chat. Have you built apps that would look like platform citizens in both iOS and Android? Have right conventions for both platforms? Last time I checked, you basically had to pick did you want to use Cupertino or Android World?
I haven't. They've always been so custom thing, but that's I think that's how you need to go. So if you want to build very specific apps, then you'll need to start separating those views that want to look different on each side, and then just duplicate.
Yeah.
Throw them out.
Okay.
And I'm like, it's not that difficult, not that complex to even identify the platforms that's running the application.
Okay. Kevin is also saying that if you are using block, you can use block test package.
Yeah, need to put that in the backlog.
To-do list. Yeah.
Thanks for the tip.
Yeah.
Then there was another question about Flutter versus React Native. So the question is that in what circumstances would you choose Flutter over React Native?
I think generally I've used the argument that I would turn the question around. So in what circumstances would you go with React Native over Flutter? And that's if you have a development platform or you use something that's heavily on React and you have a team that's heavily working a lot with React and likes JavaScript, then I would maybe consider using React Native because that might be then faster to move forward and go into the deep issues. Otherwise, I think on my perspective, Flutter becomes the default, and then we need to think about later on, do we need to go with React Native instead?
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. Like in general, I would prefer Flutter over React Native, unless like you need over-the-air update or those features only available in React Native. Then in that case, you would choose React Native over Flutter. But in general, I would choose Flutter for development experience and faster development lifecycle.
A comment from Topi. He's saying, I guess this is one of the fundamental questions when it comes to technology choices. If you need to build a platform first design for an app, maybe you would choose React Native over Flutter. If you are building an app with brand first design, then you could consider going with Flutter as it looks the same on every platform. Also a question, and how do you see Flutter in the long run?
Personally, I see Flutter is the future of cross-platform development. And yeah, I think it has like really, I think it's like Flutter itself is really incredible technology, how it works.
I think it's a very ambitious project from Google, but I think if they can pull all the stuff off, and I'm not doubting that they couldn't, it's gonna be a mainstay in cross-platform development for a long time, because it's so well architected that most of the complaints that people have are about implementation issues, and those just require investment and a bit of waiting.
Yeah.
So unlike in some other platforms where you can clearly see that it's rubbish from the base.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only fear from my part is related to what Jussi already mentioned. So does Google have the stamina for the marathon? Are they going to continue developing the platform further and further, or are they going to go, piecemealing into different directions and fragmenting and building Flutter for whatever smartwatches and Flutter for?
I think it's
ebooks.
kind of like if you look at Qt, Flutter is kind of something that's going to replace that as something that you want to go to when you're building business apps, multiple platforms. And maybe like if you compare the last question, then React Native is something you use when you're building more like website stuff, and in addition, or like an app in addition to your website.
Yeah.
And like there was just the news that Google Pay app was now replaced by a Flutter-based version just a couple of weeks ago. So I think Google is invested in that.
Yeah.
But somebody is writing in the chat that why is it gaining adoption so slowly if it's the future?
Yeah, I can answer that. Like from SOK perspective, it's been difficult to find experienced Flutter developer. That's one, and then there are more JavaScript developer than Flutter developer. Therefore, like it's easier to find like JavaScript engineer and put them in the project and just work on React Native or other cross-platform that uses JavaScript.
Yeah, I think people are blowing the question of it being a completely different language out of proportion, because the language is so easy and so familiar to anybody who's done JavaScript or has even done Java, then it's going to be really quick to pick up on. But I think that's one of the questions why people are steering away from or picking the safe choice. And of course, if the business level does decisions and the business level only understands how many Flutter developer job ads are there right now in the open, then they're going to get scared about the kind of ecosystem and that sort of stuff.
So yeah, so the critical mass is not there yet, but I believe that it's going to be there soon.
Yes, and any capable developer who does React Native will very quickly do Flutter as well. So if there's anybody thinking about these questions on the business side, then let me reassure you, yeah, it's not a real issue.
There's also a question from Krishna. What do you say about the reusability of components?
What about it?
Something to the... Okay, is there component reusability like in React Native?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, the whole platform has been built as a component-based platform. So yes, it's very much everything is reusable.
Everything comes from a widget, which is
widget. Yes. So it's
and then you can compose the widgets into more complicated components.
And it's, I would say, even more heavily on the component level than maybe React Native. I think, Boss, you can maybe comment on that, but because you also control kind of configuration and the theming and everything through components. So it's really just components.
If no more comments about the future of Flutter and Flutter in the long run, so we can move on to the Flutter ecosystem. There was a question about Flutter maturity and what libraries does Flutter have?
I think we touched a lot about the ecosystem and the kind of concerns. So I dove into some hardcore research and went to PubDev, which is the central repository for Dart packages, meaning also, of course, Flutter packages. And I pulled out a few numbers. There's roughly almost 14,000 packages there. And just in the last 24 hours, yesterday, there were 22 packages added. So it's growing in fairly fast speed. About the packages themselves, you can see that from all the packages for Dart, 92% roughly are marked as Flutter packages, while the rest are more generic Dart packages that can be like, let's say, the Mongo Dart package that I just used in the Mongo example. So again, kind of a telltale that Dart and Flutter are pretty much the same thing. Flutter has reached version 1.22, so in that case, you can expect it to be fairly stable API-wise. Dart is embedded into the Flutter distribution, so you'll always have the correct version of Dart running. And I would say that on the iOS and Android side, those platforms are quite stable. But then, as we spoke about web and we spoke about desktop, then those are alpha and up and coming. Of course, one kind of good measurement of some platforms kind of production level, or how ready is it for how stable is then what popular apps have been written. And for Flutter, I could find, well, Google Pay was mentioned now, and then New York Times has written their application with Flutter, as well as Alibaba, which is not a tiny app. So there are some very big ones out there. So of course, it's really hard to say if a platform is stable or not. I would trust. I've trusted already several projects with it. So in that sense, I feel it is. So what libraries does it have? It has 14,000 libraries. Some of the top Flutter packages are here. So you'll have Firestore, as mentioned previously. Then I don't know what the responsive framework is, because that's already built into Flutter itself. But I guess that you can have a separate package for it. And then you'll have your basic widgets for everything. And as I mentioned, it's also super simple to dive down to the native code with plugins and write your own native code as well if you lack something. If there's any questions, please do ask. Or any comments from our other experts. Do you feel that the platform is completely unstable and shouldn't be trusted?
It's not unstable, but you can say it's really matured yet in a way that compared to, for example, React Native, there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't have, even though you have 14,000 libraries, there's no guarantee that your favorite service has a library yet.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. If you want to say that the platform is mature, then probably 1 or 90% chance that when you pick your SaaS payment partner, that there's just a code example and a library 1.0 exists, and it's hosted by the provider and not by some weird guy in some weird country. So
yeah,
that's still a bit behind.
I think your best bet is to go on pubdev and just check which ones, if you're planning on building something, then just please have a check first.
We also have a new question, a fun one. What do you hate most on Flutter development?
What do you hate most? Semicolons.
Yeah, I'd say it's related to the last question a bit. So maybe the speed of change is still a bit frustrating. If you come back to your app after 4 months, everything's new. So I mean, it takes some time to adapt to all the changes in the platform and in the libraries. But in a positive note, yes, they're not usually breaking changes, so it just takes you some time to catch up to speed. But it's always a problem with a cutting edge or like a new technology.
Fast moving, yeah.
But then that's caused me the most gray hair.
For me, I find state management in library quite overwhelming. There's so many state management libraries, and sometimes you don't know what to choose. Of course, it's like you always pick the most rated one, like provider, but still it's quite overwhelming, and there's no standardized way to do it.
How about you, Takun? Do you have same headaches or something else?
I don't know. I mean, like, of course, like all the issues that I've faced are not like, I wouldn't say that they directly relate to the language or the technology itself. Of course, like you get sometimes stuck because you don't have the clear documentation also in the libraries, and then there's not enough support online. So that gets a little frustrating because some things are like really, really, really gray, and there's no clear idea of like what you should do. But other point, I think like unless we all start using it, it's never gonna grow, and the community is always gonna be smaller. So somebody has to take one for the team and help it grow.
Yeah, there's
True.
Also a question, a comment from Topi related to the libraries. Topi is saying you can always make your own library if you find out that something is missing. So thanks, Topi. We'll put that behind our ear. Okay, should we then move on to this one? Oh, there's actually a new question again. What apps SOK has published with Flutter?
Internally, we don't have any project that made with Flutter yet. We have only React Native applications so far, sadly. We have considered using Flutter in two of our projects, but it got shut down because one is Flutter doesn't support over-the-air update, and the second project was shut down because the GraphQL client was not stable on Flutter. There's more feature sets on Apollo client in React Native or in React in general.
Was this like this year or last year, or
It was
can
this
it
year.
be that the GraphQL has improved since then?
Yeah, it was this year.
This question about Redux.
Yeah, Bruno is asking, sorry, I don't know if you already discussed this topic, but what about Redux in Flutter?
Redux is there, yes, and I think it's one of the popular ways you do state management. We've mentioned several other ones here, including the provider, for instance. But yeah, Redux is there, and it works just like in the JavaScript world as well.
Well, then we had one question that we had already beforehand. It was, what makes Flutter different? We have mentioned quite a few things already, but do you want to still add something?
I can maybe start. For me, it's the experience different experience that it gives. Like if you've done a lot of like JavaScript, doing Flutter and learning Flutter in general is a good experience. And it brings a little diversity, as already discussed. And I mean, it's not very difficult to learn. Maybe it's perceived that way, that it is a little complicated because it's like Dart and that kind of stuff. But I think it's like really, really easy to learn if you have like a knowledge about the object-oriented programming and everything like that. And the layouting and development is like very, very fast. So you get instant results. You can start off with like a small application, and then you slowly build the confidence, and then you like kind of understand the power that it has and it's capable, what it's capable of. I think that's what makes Flutter different for me.
Yeah, I think the developer experience has been really well thought of. So the kind of the speed, how fast you get from going first time on Flutter.dev and where you actually have your app running, that's like that I haven't experienced the same kind of thing in any other platform. Like it's super fast, and then you have your platform that supports you creating plugins and modules and generates all the kind of native code as well that you need for it. Like it's very fast to start running and easy to architect further from there.
Yeah, I think also like the amount of control you have over the screen is like something that feels different. So because it's like a powerful rendering, it's sort of like a game engine. So it controls the whole screen. It's very different from a web view, for example.
Yeah.
So and on addition to that, the widget, the kind of the OO widget thinking makes it really easy to make like a nice UI experience.
Read quickly.
Yeah. I agree. Like the domain experience in Flutter is really, really good. Like it comes also with the test framework where you can just use it. Whereas React Native, you have to integrate external libraries for writing tests. Like of course, when you create React Native application, React application in general, it comes with just runner for running your test. But if you want to test, for instance, component, then you have to use like React test renderer. Or for end-to-end test, maybe you have to use APM or Detox for running those end-to-end tests. Whereas Flutter, it's going to come off the box. You can use Flutter Java for end-to-end tests.
Yeah. And the hot reloading is really nice, and it comes out of the box and it's really fast. And what I also like is that it's the CLI or the command line works really well. So you basically don't need an IDE, or if something is, if there's a problem in my development workflow, it's because of the IDE. It's not because of the underlying Flutter or the emulator working on my machine. I can just throw off the IDE and go into command line and check what's up. Several things in Dart that I don't like, but there's also a lot of good stuff. Very comprehensive standard library, as well as like good language notation. Like if you've ever seen, once you've used cascade notations in Dart, you'll get hooked on those, and you'll want those in every other language as well. So there's also a lot of good ideas in the language itself.
Fagun, did you want to add something or?
Just a very small point. I just really love the like the built-in code formatter that Flutter offers. I think it's really helps in like the code maintainability, and it just makes reading the code super easy and really nice. So you don't have to like install any prettier or that kind of external linters.
A lot of these small luxuries that can be only afforded when you're creating a platform from scratch. So,
Yeah, last comer.
I think we can move on to the next question, which was, what is the level of use and interest in Flutter in Finland? And of course, if you know something about the global situation, feel free to add.
Very hard to say. I mean, our meetup group, I just checked, we set it up pretty much a year ago, and now we have 240 members or something. So at least there's a lot of interest. From our point of view, Montel has been getting a lot of interest as well from the client side, and we have new projects running with Flutter, so it's gaining popularity.
Yeah, I remember like a year ago it was rocketing in Google Trends. Last I checked a couple of weeks ago, it's waning. Probably just waiting to be to become mainstream, or kind of this. People are expecting to see like real life success stories.
I think it's a good signal that, for instance, big players like SOK are now experimenting with Flutter and then considering it for their projects. And I think it's an obvious choice for smaller teams that need to move fast. But of course, like the bigger players, it's going to take time for them to adapt. Yeah. Hopefully, there will be more experimentation and kind of success stories from there.
Yeah.
How about our audience? Does someone want to say something here? Okay, now we got a comment from John. Out of my own experience, you can get a job to use Flutter, but it is obviously not as easy as other platforms. If you are a Flutter dev, you can easily get a remote job, as out there are not many experienced Flutter developers. Anyway, I am sure it will get into a better shape. It takes time to speed up a new platform.
Yeah, I have to agree to that. Like, it's really hard to find experienced Flutter developer in general. And most of a company want like a person who already had worked with the framework before.
Yes, we have a few more questions. And for these, we only have very quick answers. The first one was, is there multi-window support?
At least last I checked, it's not fully supported, at least for iPad right now. So it's an open issue. If anyone has any other experience, I'd like to hear.
Another quick question was that animated and interactive 3D content or scenes, is it even possible using Dart Flutter efficiently with or without separate plugin for different platforms?
Yeah, if I may again answer this, it's not in their focus right now. They have hands full with 2D rendering, and I think the way to go right now is using Unity 3D embedded in your Flutter app. So as far as I know, so.
Okay, then there was this question. When can we expect Google to replace Android and Chrome OS with Fuchsia plus Flutter plus Friends?
This is the question the whole internet is thinking about. And now we have an answer. No, we don't. No idea.
So you come back from Reddit and you know everything.
Yeah, I know much more than the internet. It's a promising path. I mean, Fuchsia, how do you pronounce it? The operating system is something that, if for those who don't know, it's something that Google is building, microkernel implementation that is supposed to be replacing Android, I guess, or Chrome OS, or at least something that can run on smartwatches and car dashboards and whatever. So far, it's pretty much a prototype. Flutter would be one of the kind of the main way to develop UIs on top of it. So then it would be a very interesting way to gain more popularity for Flutter. But where that is, I don't have much visibility inside Google. We are a Google partner, but they don't tell us everything.
Or maybe we just didn't read the memo.
Oh yeah, they sent me that. Yeah.
Okay, then there was one more question. Someone asked if we have any hints on best UI templates that are polished, nice, and somewhat customizable.
You don't really use UI templates.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't.
Yeah, you can take the basic material UI and then start specializing from that, or you roll your own, which is quite easy as well, actually, because you don't get ugly with Flutter.
It's hard to do ugly.
Yeah.
It's harder to do ugly.
Because it's very code. It's very like how do you say, bottom up, or like everything is code. So
Yeah.
and very well.
One part with the hot reloading, I think that's one thing that you really enjoy, building everything in Flutter.
Yeah.
Except one thing I remember, there was a question before about how to do different platforms. Like if you want to do a native look, there's the adaptive widget set that actually works so that it looks native on each platform. So maybe that's something if you want to do a polished, nice UI that looks the part on different platforms than the adaptive. What is it? Adaptive. It's adaptive. So there's a set of widgets that they implement the adaptive constructor.
Yeah.
Okay, now we have actually answered all the questions that you sent to us beforehand. We still have some time if there's new questions or comments. Okay, now we have a comment. Topi is saying, due to my experience, it has been a bit hard to convince my employers, big IT companies, to take Flutter into use in new mobile software projects. Eventually, however, I've been able to convince the right people and been lucky enough to work as a Flutter dev for a while now.
Lucky.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the path that every tech goes through. So that it appears in some crazy startup projects, and then in 5 years it's legacy Rails app. So
Yeah.
everyone's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keeping.
Yeah, I have to agree that it's hard to convince employer to pick up Flutter, like especially like new technology, because they have to invest a lot on this technology and hire more people.
And why take the risk? I mean, yeah, it's not their passion to do that technology maybe, and they don't see that those benefits straight out. But I think in Kick AI, for instance, I think it was a huge win, and one of the things that has enabled us to move so fast. Now we're building separate cross-platform apps as well as an iPad app, and integrating a lot of components between those, and the kind of development speed it wouldn't have happened without Flutter. And we did experiment with React Native, but we ran out into some issues with binding to the native side, working with native Bluetooth.
Yeah, I think the whole thing is kind of depending on getting those success stories out and kind of the critical mass, so that the decision makers can see the pros outweigh the risk.
And the business benefits as well, yeah.
Actually.
There's a good comment from John. He's saying that you want to convince employers, ask for 2 to 3 weeks of time to validate a proof of concept. You'll advance so fast that they will see the value on it.
I think that's what happened with one of our clients, that they had had a consumer kind of a game app, and that's what they did. So they wrote a proof of concept that was actually so good that it was almost ready for production. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it was a very simple decision after that.
Yeah.
But giving that kind of a time frame, like I would say, if you give it 10 days, you can write a fairly complex app already in Flutter, or at least a proof of concept.
There's also a new question to us. Achieving consistent UI in a medium or large apps, how does it work in Flutter? How would you go about to implement design system to Flutter app?
Flutter app kind of enforces you to a design system in a way. So as discussed previously, there are no templates as such. Your design system will be automatically very component based and not that parameterized. So it's going to look very uniform across different platforms.
Yeah.
There's also another new question. Morty is asking, if you were hiring people to do Flutter development, would you prefer native mobile experience or React Native experience?
Both are actually valuable. Hard to say which one I would prefer. We are hiring, by the way, so if you're interested. Both are actually very valuable, and I think with we've had people who've started with React Native and then they've moved on to Flutter and other way around. So it's a very quick adaptation both ways. If you have that mobile development mindset, then you'll have no problem moving in any direction.
Yeah, and even if with limited mobile development experience, people have been able to pick up.
Yeah.
Because I think if you have any experience with like widget-based development, for example,
React, Vue,
Qt or whatever, then I think it's very intuitive.
Yeah.
And then mostly you will then struggle with Xcode and
the
Android
IDE.
SDK problems if those pop up. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easier for React Native developer to pick up Flutter than native developer because it's pretty much the same how you make up the UI and you write the widgets.
Yeah.
But I agree that I think it's if you have mobile development experience, that's good enough to be into consideration.
Jussi and Lauri, you posted something, a link there.
Yeah, I didn't even read it. I just Googled for some examples about how to do a design system from a designer mindset or point of view, because we're looking at this from a developer point of view mostly. But actually, while Googling, I also found that there are some kind of ready-made design templates or widget libraries already popping up. So people are kind of, I think one of the advantages is that Flutter architecture forces a nice like kind of a composition of your components and the whole. So it's not like you can just wing it. Everything will work the same way if you do release something. So
there's no CSS.
Exactly. No magic. So actually.
Thank you, Marco. Marco sent a comment that this has been very useful. Thanks, Marco.
Thanks.
We really hope that the other people from the audience also share the same feeling. There's a question from Kevin. What do you think about domain-driven design architecture? Do you use it in client projects?
I don't think we've used it in extensively in any Flutter project, so can't really comment on that much. As kind of already touched previously, Flutter gives you a lot to the UI layer and how that works, but then with what happens behind, how you manage your state, you'll need to pick your library and how you whatever business logic is behind, then you'll try to find some library to handle it, or you just write your own. So it gives you a lot of freedom, kind of like React.
But of course, like Dart as well, it has the feature set to do like a domain-driven design implementations. Like you can do like an object hierarchy or class hierarchy for that. So
Okay. Nice. Any more questions? Now is your time to ask if you have anything in mind. It is almost 7 p.m. and we promised to stop talking before 7. So I think there are no more comments and questions. So thank you, John. John is saying thank you. We are saying thank you to everyone. It was great to have so many of you listening to our conversations, asking very good questions. And I wanted to ask you, if you're not in the Flutter Helsinki meetup group yet, you should join. That's a place where we inform when we have next meetup coming up. And I will also share all this material in the meetup group and also send it to those who use the type form to sign up. So if you left your email, I can send you the materials through that.
yeah, I think the questions were excellent, both the present and the ones that we got from the chat. So it was really made us think.
Fruitful, yes, good discussion.
Okay, so thank you everyone. Thanks to the experts, and let's all stay healthy and at home. Okay. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Elina.
Bye-bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.